If I asked you to name a whodunit film from the last few years, you'll most likely say Knives Out or Glass Onion, both of which were written and directed by Rian Johnson, who you might also know from Star Wars The Last Jedi. And while I enjoyed all of these movies, I've always had an affinity for his first feature film. A film that's a classic detective story set in a neo-noir genre, but it's turned on its head and set in a high school setting revolving around drugs, crime, and murder. And while this film is solely unique, it still manages to stick to the archetypes and the style of every noir film you could think of. Hi, my name's Jeff, and today I want to talk about the film Brick, and how Rian Johnson both created a unique film that managed to stick to a classic noir style and all the archetypes that go with it. When you think of film noir, you think of movies like The Third Man, The Maltese Falcon, and Sunset Boulevard. And these are movies that clearly fit into the film noir genre. It's a crime drama made from the 1930s to the late 1950s. Neo-noir films are movies that fit the film noir style, but are made after the late 1950s. Movies like Chinatown and Fargo are often used to describe this kind of genre. But most people don't think about the movie Brick. And that's a shame, because I think it's one of the most underrated examples of the neo-noir genre. While this movie is set in high school, the story and the characters are all played straight. There's nothing about this movie that screams high school angst or a sappy coming-of-age story. This is a noir film through and through, and the world built in Brick accepts that right from the beginning. I mean, the first scene is of Brendan finding his ex-girlfriend dead in a tunnel under a bridge. In fact, the language allows you to be pulled into this story and not realize that it's a high school setting because it isn't normal high school language. Instead, it's a mixture from the 1950s, the 1980s, and language that Rian made up on his own, all formed together in some amalgamation of new language that's being put into this film. And it wasn't easy for Rian to get this movie made because of that.
I mean, it was, first of all, definitely an obstacle when we were trying to get the movie made. When we were showing the script around, the first question that we got asked a lot was, do they have to talk like that?
Well, throwing at me if you want, Hashhead. I got all 5 senses, and I slept last night. That puts me 6 up on the lot of you.
And it can definitely be a barrier in some ways to, to a lot of viewers.
I can't trust you. Brad was a sap. You weren't. You're with him, so you're playing him. So you're a player. If you behind me, I'd have to tie one eye up watching both of your hands. I can't spare it.
I really enjoy the type of movies where you can kind of sink your arms into them and where it'll reward you. There's, there's enough stuff that isn't completely immediately accessible where it'll reward you digging into it a little bit.
Well, with the poking, genius, maybe you're poking for your girlfriend?
Hey, don't be a sap. I can't even face up at school. The VP's so hot for me.
Yeah, maybe you're looking to make good.
I'm looking to find this big game the Pins play. Not to gum it, but just so when its tail jams in my back, I know where to build for the embalming.
And the real function of it was to establish very clearly that we were in completely our own world here.
So what first, tip the bulls?
Nah, bulls, gum it. I'd flash their dusty standards, the wide eyes, probably find some yig to pin. Probably even know where I won. I'd trample the real tracks. I'd scare the real players back into their holes. If we're doing this, I want the whole story. No cops. Not for a bit.
On top of the language that Rian uses, there's also little things in this film, like the fact that shoes are used to characterize personalities in this story, and the use of practical effects, like having a trash bag cover a lens, pulling a newspaper off of a camera lens, or even flipping from one lens to another as a way to show someone putting glasses on. These are small but important things that Rian does in this movie to put you in Brendan's perspective. For a moment, you are Brendan waking up from passing out on the field, putting on your glasses after being taken to the Pin's house, and you're being encased by this trash bag. The tone is then set further in this world because of the original soundtrack that Rian's brother Nathan Johnson makes. In fact, Nathan has scored most of Rian's movies since Brick, and it's not because of nepotism, it's truly because he knows how to set the tone with his scores. Take this scene for instance, where the main character Brendan is looking for clues in a theater in hopes to get one step closer to figuring out where his ex-girlfriend Emily is.
hello, ma'am.
Roger Ebert reviewed this film when it came out, and he gave a pretty positive review, but his only one bit of criticism was that the characters and kids weren't believable enough for him. And this is where I disagree, because I've seen other interviews where people say something similar, and then Joseph Gordon-Levitt finds a way to explain it in a way that I never could.
No, he's not a kid. None of the characters are kids, even though kids played the characters. The characters they're archetypes. They're patterns in the human race that in this movie manifest as different parts of a high school setting.
Every character in this movie matches an archetype that you would see in a detective novel from the early 1900s. You've got the detective trying to get to the bottom of the case, and this time it's personal. You've got the helping hand for that detective trying to figure out all the intricacies and other things that are going on behind the main story. You've got the authority figure pushing down on him to do something that he doesn't necessarily want to do. And then you have the shady side of characters with their own motives. And then finally you have the villains. Every character here offers something in the film that you would see in a normal classic detective noir or detective novel in the turn of the century. And Rian has managed to walk that fine line between making something unique and one of a kind while also sticking with these archetypes and the story those archetypes can tell. This balancing act isn't always successful in movies, but Brick showcases just how much you can do with a genre that's been around since the turn of the 20th century. And I would argue without Brick, you don't have Knives Out or Glass Onion as well. In fact, you wouldn't have anything like that from Rian Johnson because Brick allowed him to have the building blocks and the know-how for these big blockbuster films like Knives Out after Brick. So if you haven't yet, put Brick on your list this year of movies to watch. You won't regret it, I promise.